Hello Total War fans. I'm gonna make a video, which I haven't done in a while. I've been mostly live recently, but I'm gonna make a video for a change, and this is gonna be the first in a series because again, you guys have kind of voted for this stuff. Looking at races in Total War Warhammer 1 and 2. I'm going to start at the start in terms of the first game. I'm going to start with Karl Franz and his Empire. We're going to talk a little bit about the campaign, as much as possible. Why is this on normal? Let's just put that to hard, just so I don't forget to change it later. So we're going to talk about the campaign in general, and we're going to talk about the army build, and instead of, you know, how they fight everybody, more about their strengths and weaknesses, as opposed to, you know, going through race by race every time, which is kind of hard to watch. So, the Empire have 3 legendary lords. They all start in the same place on both campaign maps. They start in Reichland in Altdorf. You can start with Emperor Karl Franz, you can start with Balthasar Gelt, or you can start with Volkmar the Grim. Each of which have their own story that you can read by clicking this little thing here in Mortal Empire's campaign, and there's a second sheet in the first game. I'm not going to go through their stories because it will take too long. I will go through lore at some point though, because you've asked for that as well in general. And
Sigmar's will.
The faction effects actually change slightly depending on who you choose as your lord.
Summon the Elector Counts.
And of course by the end of your campaign you can have all 3 heroes. Emperor Karl Franz is unlocked by confederating another Empire army. Balthasar Gelt is unlocked by completing a building, as is Volkmar the Grim. Jinx. They all start with slightly different units as well, and to be honest, I think the only good start as Empire
As I hold Gal Maraz, I am ready.
Is Franz. Even now with the magic upgrades, I still think that Franz is the best option, just because basically he can fight off the other lords, and the other lords are quite problematic in the start of the Empire campaign. He also is pretty good at dealing damage to units as well, and he does have this extra upkeep for top range units, not to mention the leadership buff that really helps, though you get that regardless of whether you start with him or not. Also, I think that he has the best starting roster, though Balthasar Gelt does have the mortar, at least. So that's basically it, looking at the start of the Empire. I'll talk a little bit about the campaign. I'll be back in just a second. Alright, so this is how the Empire campaign looks both in Mortal Empires and in the original campaign. In future races where they have different start points, I will actually show them separately, but the Empire start in Altdorf every time in the region of Reichland. They have the Empire Secessionists as a rebellion they need to crush. They have other human factions around them, undead to the east, and they've got the Bretonnians to the west, Norse to the north, and to the south you have orcs and all kinds of horrible things down there. Now, the Empire rely heavily on diplomacy, and diplomacy can be the difference between victory and defeat as the Empire. And you have some main friends, and you have some people that are kind of a problem, and I'm going to give a few spoilers here, so if you don't want to know, then skip ahead a little bit to the point where I'm no longer looking at the map. Your main allies are Wissenland to the south, Talabakland and Stoland actually, to the east. You have all of the Bretonnian factions to the west, and the dwarves that are down here somewhere, as well as, I'm going to assume the High Elves, though I haven't actually played the Mortal Empires. I can't see a reason to go to war with the High Elves though, and they will help you if the Dark Elves and Lizards do eventually come to attack you. The main threats to you, and your main rivals in general, are the Undead. And the Undead are both here, and you've also got Morzilon in Bretonnia. There's also some in the Southlands, so you can ask the Dwarves to deal with them, or you can go and deal with them late game. The Norse and the Chaos, of course, are also major enemies. Norse up here, sorry, not here. These are humans. And in some playthroughs, Midland can prove a problem because Boris Todbringer is, lore-wise, the other claimant to the throne. Karl Franz's father has died, and the Empire are basically split on who should lead. Boris is a strong claimant, Karl is a strong claimant. Most of the factions support you, but the two Osters, Nordland, Marienburg, they all support Middenland's claim. And Marienburg are also a potential problem. You have to either deal with them very quickly via diplomacy, or deal with them very quickly via warfare. They can also be one of your main source of income if you do destroy them. This whole land, basically, is the income land, Reitland and Marienburg. The rest of them are kind of defensive buffers against the impending chaos attack and the undead. You can use them as allies in this way, or you can use them as your own land. The other faction that basically it can go either way are Averland. Sometimes they help you out and they fight the undead, sometimes they help the undead out and they fight you. So they're kind of unpredictable. The fact that now that we can actually take any land makes it interesting, because you have an orc hold just in the north up here that you can potentially take now, whereas before you could only destroy it. And the orcs can cause problems if you leave them alive too long, as can the wood elves to the south, potentially. But talking about the faction in general then, the Empire survive mostly on a good combination of financial stability and a well-rounded military. Well-rounded military. That sentence made sense on its own. As a result, you have to be kind of careful how you build your cities. You need to have a good mix of finance. The port can really help with that. The clay pit can really help with that. And the weaving house, can really help with income. You also need a mix of all of the military buildings within the region somewhere. So 1 infantry, 1 cavalry, 1 artillery, though the artillery can actually survive without. The artillery's main purpose is to make sure that the enemy is coming to you and you don't have to face the enemy. The only time you're really going to be charging yourself is against dwarves, and it's not a good idea to fight dwarves. Getting the foundry is very important as well, because it means you can build the elite units, and also getting hold of the Sigmar category, because that unlocks Balthazar Gelt, I believe. The Imperial Academy can be useful, though it's not necessary. The same with the Imperial Palace, it mostly helps with public order. And the Colleges of Magic can also help because this unlocks Volkmar the Grim, or vice versa. I can't remember which is which off the top of my head now. It's also a good idea to have a tap room in every region, just to make sure that rebellions are minimal, because rebellions do not help the Empire, whereas they do help factions that require a lot of military. The Empire don't necessarily require a lot of military, which is quite interesting in a Total War game. That's basically it for the building browser and the lords. So the main goals of the Empire. Your first job is to remove the rebellion in Reitland, so get rid of these secessionists. It should take you 5 to 6 turns. It's also worth doing the first quest very quickly as well, because it will give you your first access to magic if you haven't started off with Balthazar or Volkmar. And magic is now essential in this game, whereas before it was an extra. Now they've upgraded it, you need it, actually. After that, it's all about securing the Empire, and securing the Empire is a balancing act of defending your own land against Beastmen incursions, Orc incursions, and the ever-impending undead and Norse incursions, while also taking control of the human lands either through alliance or through, well, confederation or indeed military force, whichever way you decide to go. Your strongest route, to be honest, is to secure Marienburg and kind of sit for a while until things calm down a bit. Then when everybody's kind of secure, you can start confederating. And if you confederate slowly, by building up factions first, making sure they're strong, and then confederate, you should be able to maintain your defensive line. I would recommend for each region that you have an army to support it, as the Empire, which can get expensive, so you need to keep your monetary gains high through trade and through those buildings that we talked about. There are some extra buildings in Marienburg that can help you. And this will be it for the campaign. If there's anything you think I'm missing from the campaign section, because this is new, then please do tell me in comments below, and I'll try to address them next time. But let's have a look at army builds and fighting in multiplayer. Now this is the hardest bit for me, because this is the bit that I'm not as experienced with, but I have faced a lot of enemies and I roughly know how to fight. I'm not going to talk about how to defeat specific enemies. I'm going to instead talk about strengths and weaknesses and difficult enemies in general. Basic tactics and how to counter these basic tactics. So basically, if you watch all the videos, you find out how to fight certain factions. So the Empire. The Empire rely heavily on a mixed army. So you need a strong line of infantry, and a front line for that matter, that are going to hold against rush armies that are going to do the majority of the fighting against armies that have similar setups. And in general, they're going to hold the line against whatever can come at you while your cavalry do all the damage. So you have a front line of infantry. You need your missile infantry behind, or gunners to the side, and you need your cavalry to charge around. You can also take artillery, of course, and the artillery is useful so you can hold your line against the enemy, basically. If you're in an artillery versus artillery match, of course your cavalry have to deal with the enemy artillery as quickly as possible, then come back and do their primary job. In terms of legendary lords, you have your military lord, Karl Franz, as a legendary lord. You also have two extra military lords, the Archlector, who is better for leadership buffs, and the General of the Empire, who is more a gritty, in-the-fight kind of guy. If you have an Archlector, then your units are probably going to stay in the battle longer, whereas if you have a General, you're more likely to kill the enemy General, depending. Boris Todbringer is another option, and to be honest, I've never used him. I don't know what his strengths and weaknesses are, if I'm brutally honest. He kind of looks like Karl Franz Light to me, and if we compare the two, yeah, his defense is slightly higher, but everything else is a bit lower, and he's not a duelist. So there we go, they're kind of similar. There is a melee expert, and Karl Franz is not. You also have your two magical lords, Volkmar the Grim, who is kind of a combination of military might and magic, and Balthazar, who is very much a magic, stay-out-of-the-way kind of wizard. So they're your lords. In terms of heroes, there are a lot of them. You've got many different types of wizard. They all have different magical... They all have different disciplines in magic. The Jade Wizard is mostly about nature. The Amber Wizard... I don't know what the Amber Wizard does. Let's have a look. The Amber Wizard is death, really? Okay. Oh no, he's a range. Okay, he has a range of magic, actually. The Light Wizard is mostly about healing. The Bright Wizard is mostly about aggressive, mostly fire-based magic. And the Celestial Wizard, I think, is kind of a mix as well, though I'm not sure again. Yes, he's a mix of light, nature, and steel. You have a Witch Hunter. No, you don't. You have a Grey Wizard. Okay, I don't know the Grey Wizard either. There we go. Should have probably researched this before I started the video, but never mind. Grey Wizard is also a mix. It looks like basically Jade Wizard, Light Wizard, and Celestial Wizard are buffs and the opposite, debuffs, and the Amber Wizard, Bright Wizard, and indeed the Grey Wizard are mostly aggressive wizards that do damage. The Warrior Priest is like the slightly weaker Archlector, where he basically helps with buffs and he can stay in battle for a long time because his leadership is very high. The Witch Hunter is basically a sniper. You can send him into fight enemy heroes, enemy lords, and hopefully do enough damage to get them out of the fight. And your Empire Captain is your standard sword in hand, charge the enemy kind of hero. He's also got some pretty useful buffs though when it comes to leadership, so it's usually a toss-up for me if I'm going to take a hero between these three, if I'm taking a wizard, or between the Bright Wizard and the Light Wizard if I'm going to take Karl Franz or a military leader. In terms of your infantry then, your main standard line is your spearmen. The spearmen were shields in missile-heavy enemies, your standard spearmen in big enemies and that don't have a lot of missiles, basically. The shields help against the missiles. Non-shield spearmen will be killed by enemy missiles. Swordsmen can help, but they're kind of useless, to be honest, against most armies. The only main reason to have swordsmen is to take a load of fire. That's their main role in multiplayer. I'm quite fond of them in the campaign because they're pretty good at dealing with spearmen, but in terms of, if you can get them in the flank, but in terms of multiplayer, they're kind of useless, to be honest. Flagellants are basically a unit that you just send into the fight and get killed very quickly. Well, not very quickly, but they'll stay right until the end, so you can hold off an elite unit potentially with them right until the end and deal with them later. So if, for example, you have a Black Orc on the enemy side, then send the Flagellants against them. They'll lose the fight, but the Black Orcs will be out of the fight for a very long time, and you can deal with the rest of the army while they are locked up. Halberds are like the slightly stronger spearmen, though again they don't have shields, though they are armor-piercing, whereas the spearmen are not. The Regiment of Renown swordsmen are better than the standard swordsmen. I would actually recommend them. They're like a slightly better flagellant unit, actually, because they can do more damage. The flagellants are also quite good, and the main meat and potato of the army are the great swords. These are your elite infantry. They're going to be facing off against other infantry mostly, as they are anti-infantry, but they're also armor-piercing, so they can take down chaos, they can take down beastmen, they can take down dwarves. So it's worth keeping that in mind. These make up your front line. I would recommend, for example, 4 spearmen, a unit of great swords, and the regiments of renown. In most situations, these are going to hold the line for you. Okay, though you can build differently depending on certain armies. For example, I'd probably take more halberdiers than spearmen if I was facing against chaos, for example. In terms of missile infantry, the Free Company are a combination of short-range missiles and also infantry. They're pretty good for flanking. If you're pretty good at micromanagement, they can be very useful. If you're not a big fan of micromanagement, they're kind of in the way and you'd wish they weren't in your army. The crossbows are your main anti-infantry missiles that fire over the heads of their friends. And the handgunners are the armor-piercing units that can shoot down pretty much anything. If you can get them into the rear or the flank of an enemy unit, you can do a hell of a lot of damage and you can destroy the enemy morale, no matter who you're facing. But handgunners do require some maneuverability, which I find a lot of generals do quite badly when they're playing as the Empire. I tend to try and get them in the back, personally, try and get them into the rear or the flank of elite units. So, like I said, your main strategy is infantry holds, missiles do damage, and cavalry charge in and kill everything. Your basic Empire Knights aren't bad, to be honest, especially for their price. They are armored and shielded, and they are anti-infantry. They're not going to help you against armor, though. That's the main problem with them. The Reichland are the same, but they're slightly stronger. To be honest, though, I would recommend just taking Empire Knights, because they serve the same purpose, and they're a lot cheaper. There are, of course, some differences. As you can see, the Reichsguard are quite a lot stronger, but at the same time, I don't think their price really makes up for it in most combats. Knights of the Blazing Sun, then, are the third in the formation, and to be honest, they're the most useless in the faction, I find. They're good at anti-infantry, they're not really good at anything else, so make of that what you will. All 3 of them are good at doing the job of basically hitting the rear or hitting the flank of enemies, charging out, charging in, charging out, charging in. The Demigryphs, however, they are one of the strongest units in the entire game. Don't worry about in the Empire side. They're anti-infantry, armor-piercing, and they're armor and shielded. If you're not facing armies with a lot of big things, the standard Demigryph Knights are perfectly fine. If you're facing monsters, then the Demigryphs with halberds are better, or other cavalry. So against Bretonnia, against Beastmen, against Chaos, the halberds can be useful, though the normal Demigryphs are usually enough to do all the damage you need to do. The Pistoliers, the Outriders, and the Outrider Grenade Launchers are all very good for what they do, but they require so much micromanagement that I personally don't find the use for them. I prefer having a standing line of handgunners than, for example, outriders. Though the outriders and the handgunners can do the same job, the outriders do it quicker, but you need to make sure they're on skirmish mode and you need to bring them back into the battle all the time, so they're kind of annoying. And then in terms of artillery, the mortar is very good at ripping apart the enemy formation and causing havoc basically on the enemy side. The cannon is good for basic damage when shooting in a straight line, though they will become useless after a point, whereas the mortar can keep going until somebody gets rid of it. The Hellblaster volley gun is kind of just a mess, as you can fire this into a line that's coming towards you and they will rip the hell out of the enemy. And they're armor piercing as well, so you can hit literally anything with them and it will destroy their morale. The rocket battery I find pretty damn useless, to be honest. It mostly just rips up the formation but doesn't do a lot of damage, I tend to find. It's good for confusing your opponent, but you're not going to get a lot of kills out of it, which is kind of the problem. And the Luminarch is kind of overpowered. You could just shoot it straight at a Lord, it probably won't miss, and Lord goes bye-bye. Same with a steam tank. It's the tank, funnily enough, of the Empire army, where you can fire from long range and you can also send it into a fight and it will destroy anything it fights until something can finally put it down. I personally think these two are too cheesy to put in any army if I'm playing seriously, so I wouldn't put them in a multiplayer battle against a person. Against a computer maybe, in the campaign definitely, but against a person I'm probably not using them personally. And that's basically it. So the main strength of the Empire is that they have a very, very solid repertoire of, well, everything. They have something for every single job. They're very good at holding their line and fighting off an enemy with the help of cavalry charges in the rear and the side. And basically, if you can use the army in a very standard hammer and anvil tactic, then it will very much work in your favor. The main weakness of the Empire is that when it comes down to it and they're actually in the fight, they're going to struggle against a lot of enemies. The main line is going to crumble against, for example, orcs over time. The elite units can get locked up, and if the enemy is pretty good at countering your charges, countering your artillery, etc., then it can cause you all kinds of problems. Another thing I find a lot of Empire generals do wrong is they spend way too much on artillery. To be honest, you just need one. If you've bought 2 or 3, then you've wasted money where you could have spent it on the line, where you could have spent it in cavalry, where you could have spent it in missiles. The artillery are helpful, but they're not as important as, for example, in a dwarf army. So that's the main thing I see generals do wrong, and I actually really like it when I see an Empire army with 2 or 3 artillery units, because I can get my cavalry units to deal them very quickly, and then I'm only facing half an army, as opposed to facing a big scary army of Empire. So that's basically all I have to say about battles. If there's anything else you think I've missed about the faction in general, about battles, about anything, then please do let me know. Thank you if you have watched the video right up until the end, and well, let me know what you want me to do with this series going forward. This is just basically, I did this off the cuff, didn't really think about it too much. I may start thinking about it with the future ones, but I'm pretty familiar with the Empire army, so I didn't feel the need to. But any criticism, any help you can give me, tell me below. Anything you want to say that you think I've said wrong, or etc., again, say below. I make these videos mostly to start discussions, not to say I am the king of this game. So, like when I do Blood Bowl, like when I do More Time, I'm not the best player at these games at all. I mostly want to see the community help new players to the game, and this is a start point and a jumping board. Springboard, I should say. So keep that in mind, and any help that you can offer, write it in the comments below. Thank you very much. That's all for this first one. I'll see you soon. Bye bye for now.